Have you ever stopped to think about what really happens after death? Is there something beyond this life? What awaits us on the other side? These questions have intrigued humanity since the beginning of time. But what if I told you that an answer came from where no one expected it? A 3-year-old child went through an experience that defies logic, something so impressive that it left doctors without explanation and made his family wonder, could this be a sign from God? Little Sophia experienced something that changed her life forever. She was between life and death. Her heart stopped. Her body no longer responded. There were minutes of despair, prayers and tears, but then, when all seemed lost, something unbelievable happened. She came back, and with a look of peace that no one could explain, he pronounced words that chilled everyone. I saw God. Now think about it with me. How could a 3-year-old child, without the influence of beliefs or theological knowledge, say this with so much certainty? What did she see in that brief moment she was on the other side? What did God reveal to her that could change everything we know about life and eternity? In Jeremiah 33:3, the Lord invites us to seek Him. Call to me, and I will answer you, and I will tell you great and hidden things which you do not know. Was this experience one of those hidden revelations? If you feel that there is something greater in this life, if you have ever experienced a moment in which you felt the presence of God in an inexplicable way, then this story may be the answer you are looking for. What this girl said left her family and everyone around her speechless, but the most impressive was yet to come. What she revealed next was something no one was prepared to hear. What Sophia experienced was not just a moment of illusion or a passing delirium. It was a glimpse of what awaits us, a sign that God is showing us something greater. And if this story reached you today, believe me, He may be trying to talk to you too. Stories like this carry messages that need to be spread, and you can be part of that. Leave your like so that this word reaches more people and transforms lives. With each testimony shared, more hearts are touched, and more people come closer to God. Not part of this community yet? Sign up now and activate the bell to follow stories that inspire, strengthen faith, and reveal truths that can completely change the way you see life. What I'm going to tell you now is something that defies all logic, something that made even the most skeptical people question what really happens after death. Little Sophia, just 3 years old, went through an experience that changed her family's life forever. A near-death experience that brought a message so strong, so impactful, that even doctors were left speechless. Sophia was a girl full of life, one of those who brightened up any environment with a simple smile. She loved playing in the backyard, running barefoot through the grass, feeling the wind on her face. Her parents always said that she had a special light, a sparkle in her eyes that enchanted everyone. But on a day that seemed like any other, something terrible happened, something no one could have predicted. It was a sunny afternoon, and Sophia was playing happily while her mother watched her from the balcony. Everything seemed peaceful, until suddenly the unexpected happened. One moment she was laughing, and the next she fell to the ground, completely still. Time seemed to stop. Her mother screamed her name and ran to her, but Sophia didn't respond. Her little eyes were closed, her little chest didn't move. Despair took over. The father, upon hearing his wife's screams, ran to the backyard, and upon seeing the scene, felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He took his daughter in his arms, called her name several times, but nothing. Sophia didn't react. There were no visible beats, no breath. It was as if life had slipped away from her in the blink of an eye. Panic set in. The mother was shaking, holding the phone with shaking hands as she dialed emergency. Her father tried to revive her, but every second without response seemed like an eternity. The sound of sirens, which usually brought a sense of relief, this time seemed to carry an unbearable weight. Paramedics arrived quickly, took over the situation and began resuscitation procedures. Cardiac massage, artificial respiration, everything possible was done. But the minutes passed, and Sophia still had no signs of life. The rescuers' gaze began to change from determination to concern. They looked at each other, as if they already knew that perhaps there was nothing more that could be done. And it was at that exact moment that something inexplicable happened. While here on Earth doctors fought to bring her back, Sophia was experiencing something none of us can even imagine. Because in that moment when her small body remained motionless, Sophia found herself in another place. She later described that everything became silent, that an indescribable warmth came over her, and then she felt as if she were floating. She saw her own body being attended to by paramedics. She saw her parents crying in despair, but she wasn't afraid. And then, something even more incredible happened. An intense light appeared before her, a light so bright that, according to her own words, it didn't hurt her eyes, but it embraced, enveloped, transmitted a peace that doesn't exist in this world. And in the midst of that light, someone was there. Sophia said she saw a man, but it wasn't just any man. She said she felt such great love from him that she couldn't explain it. And then he smiled and said something that made her feel infinitely happy. But what did he say? What did she hear in this mysterious encounter? Minutes passed and the doctors were about to give up. But then, suddenly, something unbelievable happened. Sophia, who had no signs of life, had not been breathing for several minutes, simply opened her eyes, as if nothing had happened, as if waking up from a deep dream. The parents, who were crying, went into shock. The paramedics looked at each other, not knowing how to explain. There was no logic. There was no medical explanation. But Sophia was back. And then, when everything seemed to finally calm down, she said something that made silence fill the room. Something that made his mother fall to her knees and his father hold his face in his hands, not believing what he was hearing. She looked at her parents and, with the innocence of a 3-year-old child, said, "Mommy, I saw God." Now I ask you, how could such a small child say something like that? How could she claim with such certainty that she saw God? Where did this experience come from? Was it a delusion? An illusion? Or did she really catch a glimpse of eternity? The doctors didn't know how to answer. The parents were speechless. But Sophia kept talking. She described details she could never have invented, details that seemed straight out of scripture. She talked about a beautiful garden, about a place where everything was peace, where there was no pain, fear, or sadness. But the most impressive thing was when she told what God told her, and that's what I'm going to tell you now. Because what this girl revealed is something that could change your view of the spiritual world, something that could be the answer for many who question whether God really exists, whether there is life after death, whether there is a greater purpose for all of us. Experiences like this reveal something greater, and by sharing your testimony, you can strengthen the faith of someone who needs this message today. Have you ever heard of a near-death experience? Do you believe that children can have spiritual visions? Comment, "Yes, I believe it." Do you know anyone who has experienced something supernatural or has gone through it? Share in the comments. Let's create a chain of testimonies, because the more we talk about these signs, the more we realize that God is acting among us. At that moment, while the doctors continued desperately trying to revive her, and her parents cried out to God for a miracle, Sophia was no longer there. His small body lay motionless without vital signs, but his consciousness, that was in a completely different place. A place where time and space seemed to not exist, where pain and fear no longer had control over her. She later said that, at the moment everything went dark, she felt something different, as if she were being gently detached from her own body. It wasn't scary. There was no pain, no despair. On the contrary, it was as if a huge weight had been lifted from her. Sophia saw the scene she had left behind, but not as someone who is awake and conscious. She was above it all, watching. She saw the doctors working frantically over her body. She saw the desperate expressions of her parents, the tears streaming down her mother's face as she repeated her name as if trying to call her soul back. But as much as she saw that moment of despair, she didn't feel afraid. There was something there, something bigger, something that enveloped her with an inexplicable love. Sophia felt weightless, as if she were floating in a sea of peace. Then she realized she wasn't alone. It was at that moment that a light began to shine around him. At first it was a soft, distant glow like a sunrise over the horizon, but as she got closer, the light became more and more intense, and yet it didn't hurt her eyes. It was a living, pulsating light, as if it had its own heat, and within her, a presence that Sophia felt in every part of her being. The little girl was attracted to this light in a way that she could not resist. There was something there that called to her, something that conveyed love in a way no words could describe. It was such a welcoming feeling that it made everything she knew in the physical world seem distant and unimportant. As she advanced towards this light, she began to hear a sound. It was not an ordinary sound, but a soft melody, as if angelic voices were singing. It was something so harmonious, so perfect, that Sophia felt her heart, or whatever her essence was at that moment, vibrate in tune with that celestial song. Then she realized there was a path ahead of her. It was not made of earth or rocks, but of something shiny, almost transparent, as if it were formed from pure energy. She began to follow him, floating smoothly, effortlessly. It was as if I was being carried away by that light, and that's when something even more surprising happened. Sophia felt a presence beside her. At first it was just a feeling, as if someone was there, watching her tenderly. But as it progressed, that presence became clearer, more real. And then she saw him. He was a man, but not an ordinary man. His figure emanated a light so intense that it seemed to merge with the surrounding environment. His face was serene, full of compassion. His eyes conveyed something impossible to describe, something that seemed to contain all the love in the universe. He smiled at her, and in that instant, Sophia knew exactly who he was, even without anyone needing to tell him. It was God. She couldn't explain how, but she just knew. It was as if, deep in his soul, he had always known that look, that love, that presence. He didn't need to say anything for Sophia to understand that she was before the Creator, before the one who formed every star in the sky, every particle in the universe. And then he spoke. The voice that echoed inside her was not like the voices we know here on earth. They were not loose words, but a deep feeling, something that was not only heard but felt in every part of the being. It was as if each syllable was imbued with love, as if each sound was a melody in perfect harmony with creation. He called Sophia by name. The little girl, floating in that place of pure light, felt indescribable happiness. Nothing in the world could compare to that feeling. She wanted to stay there forever. She wanted to remain in that invisible embrace that surrounded her completely, but God had something to tell him, and that's what I'm going to tell you now. Because what Sophia heard in that moment was not just a message for her, but for all of us. A revelation that can completely change the way we see life, death, and the purpose of everything that exists. Your experience can transform lives. Was there a time when the presence of God was so strong that there was no doubt that it was something divine? An instant in which his love filled your heart in an inexplicable way? Comment: I have already felt God with me. Your testimony may be exactly what someone needs to read today to strengthen their faith and remember that we are never alone. At that moment, Sophia felt as if she was completely enveloped by that celestial light, a light that not only illuminated, but seemed to have an essence of its own, as if it were made of pure love. She couldn't explain what she felt in words, but it was something that filled every part of her being. A love so great, so intense, that there was nothing like it on earth. There was no fear, no doubts, just an absolute certainty that I was in a sacred place, a place of absolute peace. As she floated in that space where time and pain didn't exist, Sophia realized she wasn't alone. The presence she had felt before was now getting closer and closer, and then before her, a being of light appeared. Its shape was difficult to describe. It wasn't like a physical body, but it wasn't just light either. It was something beyond what the human mind can comprehend. His appearance was both familiar and indescribable. There was something divine about his presence, something that radiated kindness and compassion. Sophia looked at him and, without anyone needing to tell her, she knew. She knew she was before God. Not as we imagine here on earth, not as paintings or stories describe, but as he really is. And at that moment, his little heart was filled with a sensation that could not be translated into words. It was as if all existence made sense, as if all questions had answers without needing to be asked. God looked at Sophia tenderly. It wasn't an ordinary look. It was a look that went through her soul, that understood her completely. And then he smiled, a smile so pure that it seemed to contain the very meaning of life. Then he spoke. It was not a voice that was heard with the ears, but with the heart. It was as if each word was engraved into the very essence of the universe, as if it were a truth that had always existed. Sophia couldn't repeat exactly what the words were, but she knew what he meant. He said he loved her. He said he was always by her side, even in moments when she didn't realize it. He said there was a purpose to his life. Sophia felt tears running down her face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of joy so deep that it could barely fit inside her. It was as if, for the first time, he knew who he really was. as if he understood that his existence was part of something much bigger. She looked around and saw that the place was not empty. There was something there, something grand. On the horizon, she saw what appeared to be an immense garden. The colors were unlike anything I had ever seen. The green was brighter, the blue deeper, and the flowers glowed like little sparks of light. The air was pure, and there was a soft sound in the background as if everything was in perfect harmony. But then, something caught his attention even more. She saw people. Yes, there were people there. Some were further away. Others seemed to be walking towards the light. They were serene figures, and they all conveyed an indescribable peace. But among them, there was something that made Sophia's heart beat faster. She recognized faces. Among those people, she saw someone she had never met in life, but who in some way felt like they were part of her. It was a man, and next to him was a woman with a loving smile. They looked at her tenderly, as if they had known her for a long time. Sophia felt an instant connection, but she couldn't explain who they were. It was then that God said something to her that left her speechless. He showed her that these were people from her family, people who had already left before she was even born. Sophia didn't know their names, but when she returned to her body and described the people she saw, her parents were in shock. She told details, described traits, mentioned characteristics that she could not have known. She had seen great-grandparents and uncles who had left long before she came into the world. But, before he could understand all that, something happened. God approached her and placed his hands on her head. Sophia felt a gentle warmth, an energy that filled every part of her being. He looked into her eyes and said something that changed everything. She needed to go back. Sophia didn't want to go back. That place was so beautiful, so full of peace, that his soul wanted to stay there forever. But God, with his infinite wisdom, said it was not yet his time. He told her that there was something she needed to do, a mission that had not yet been accomplished. Sophia tried to argue. How could a 3-year-old want to leave something so wonderful? But God, with a look full of love, said that one day she would return. But for now she needed to carry a message. And then in the blink of an eye everything disappeared. The light dissipated. The angelic voices became a distant whisper, and the feeling of peace began to fade. Sophia felt her body again, felt her heart beat again, felt the air enter her lungs, and then he opened his eyes. What happened after that is something that left everyone around him perplexed. What Sophia said, the way she described her experience, was something no one expected to hear, and that's exactly what I'm going to tell you now. Have you ever experienced a moment when God's presence was so intense that there was no doubt that he was there? A dream, a vision, or a feeling that confirmed that there is something much greater beyond this life? Comment, I know God is real. Your story could be the answer someone is looking for right now. At that moment, as if she had been pulled back by an invisible force, Sophia opened her eyes. There was no gradual awakening, no signs of confusion or fear. It was as if she simply existed again in the physical world, with the same purity and serenity she felt in the presence of God. His small body, which had previously seemed lifeless, was now breathing again. The hospital room was filled with absolute silence, interrupted only by the heart monitors that suddenly registered their heartbeats again. The mother, who moments before had been kneeling next to her daughter's bed, jumped up. The tears that were once of despair were now of pure shock. The father, who was holding the girl's cold hand, felt a sudden heat run through his fingers. The doctors and nurses looked at each other in disbelief. That didn't make sense. Sophia had been without vital signs for too long, and yet there she was, not only alive, but with an expression so calm that it seemed as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But what happened next was even more impressive. Sophia turned her face to her mother, looked deep into her eyes, and with the innocence of a child who still doesn't understand the weight of her words, said something that made everyone's hearts in the room race. Mommy, I saw God. Time seemed to stop. Nobody knew what to say. The mother covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide. Dad felt a shiver run down his spine. The doctors, used to dealing with the fine line between life and death, just exchanged looks of confusion. But Sophia didn't stop there. She continued talking, and what she said made everyone there feel like they were facing something much bigger than they could understand. With her soft and childish voice, but filled with an unusual certainty for a child of just 3 years old, Sophia began to describe what she had experienced. She spoke about the light that enveloped her, about the infinite peace she felt. She said she floated above her own body, saw the doctors trying to save her, saw her parents crying, but at no point did she feel scared. What left everyone even more perplexed was when she described the words she heard from God. She said he called her by name, smiled at her and said he loved her. But there was something more. God told her she had to return, that it wasn't his time yet, that his mission on earth was not yet over. And then, with the innocence and simplicity of someone who has just returned from the impossible, Sophia looked at her parents and said something that made them feel a deep shiver. He said you don't need to be afraid. He said he is always with you. The mother burst into tears, hugging her daughter as tightly as her heart would allow. The father, always skeptical, always trying to find rational explanations for everything, couldn't say anything. He just held his daughter's hand and tried to process what was happening. But Sophia didn't stop. She began to describe the place where she had been. He said he saw a beautiful garden with colors that don't exist here. He spoke of a river of light where the waters seemed to be made of liquid gold. He said the air smelled sweet, like flowers she had never seen before. But then came the most shocking moment. Sophia looked at her mother and said she saw a man and a woman she had never met before, but who seemed to know her. She said they smiled at her, seemed happy to see her, but also said it wasn't her time yet. The mother felt a deep shiver. She took out her cell phone and showed Sophia some old family photos. Among several images, Sophia pointed to one firmly. It was a couple. The mother's face turned pale. His eyes filled with tears. And then Sophia said something that made that family's world turn upside down. "Mommy, they were there. They said they love you so much." The mother began to cry uncontrollably. The couple that Sophia recognized in the photo were her maternal grandparents. But there was an impossible detail in this story. They had passed away many years before Sophia was born. She never met them. You've never seen a photo of them before. You never heard their voices. And yet, she described them in detail that not even her mother would have been able to remember with such precision. The doctors didn't know what to say. For them, Sophia had spent too long without adequate oxygenation to her brain. If he came back to life, he would have had consequences. But there she was, lucid, smiling, telling things she could never have invented. The father, who had always been a man of science, tried to look for some rational explanation. But deep down he knew there was no logic that could explain it. That night, after the doctors confirmed that Sophia was completely fine, something that, in itself, was already considered a miracle, her parents stayed at her bedside, watching her sleep. But the girl's sleep was not restless. There were no nightmares. She slept peacefully with a smile on her face, as if she still felt the presence of God by her side. And then the mother looked at the starry sky through the hospital window and remembered what her daughter had said. He said he's always with you. That night changed everything for that family. And what Sophia brought from this experience, the words that God entrusted to her, are something that can transform not only the lives of those who heard her story, but also that of all of us who seek answers, who want to understand the purpose of life, who want to feel the divine presence. And that's exactly what I'm going to tell you now, because the message that Sophia brought back is something that will make you see life in a completely different way. Have you ever experienced a moment when God's presence was so real that there was no doubt that he was there listening and protecting you? Comment, "I know that God is with me." Your testimony may be exactly the answer someone needs to read today to feel like they are not alone. After that night, nothing was the same again. Little Sophia, who until then was just a child like any other, now carried with her something that no one could explain, something that was beyond human understanding. His eyes, once full of the innocence common to any child, now seemed to carry a different shine, a look that seemed to see beyond what was visible. Her parents, who had always been loving and protective, began to see her in a different way. Not because they treated her as someone special or different, but because they knew she had experienced something great, something that not even adults, scholars, religious leaders, or scientists could fully understand. And the most impressive thing was that Sophia didn't seem confused or scared by what had happened. On the contrary, she talked about it with the naturalness of someone telling us what they ate for breakfast. The first change her parents noticed was that Sophia started talking about God all the time. Before, like any child her age, she repeated some prayers that her parents taught her, but without much understanding of the meaning. Now, everything was different. She spoke about God as someone would talk about a close friend, someone she knew deeply. She said he was always there, that she could feel him everywhere, and the most incredible thing was the way she described his presence. One day, while playing in the backyard, Sophia looked up at the sky and said something that made her mother shudder. "Mommy, he's smiling at us now." The mother stopped what she was doing and looked at her daughter. The sky was clear, without clouds. There was nothing different, but the conviction with which Sophia spoke was so strong that it made her heart race. It wasn't just what she said, but the way she said it. It seemed that Sophia saw things that no one else could see. Another memorable moment happened when the family went to visit the church. Before Sophia's experience, they attended services, but like many families, they did so out of tradition, without deeper involvement. But that Sunday morning, upon entering the church, Sophia stopped at the door and stared at the altar. His eyes sparkled and a soft smile formed on his face. "Mommy, he's here." The mother knelt down at that moment. She knew exactly what Sophia was talking about. That experience not only changed Sophia, but completely transformed her family. His father, who had always been a more rational man, began looking for answers. At first, he tried to find scientific explanations for what his daughter experienced. He even talked to doctors, read articles about near-death experiences, studied how the brain can create hallucinations in extreme situations. But the more I researched, the more I realized that scientific answers were not enough. Because there was something that science could not explain. How did Sophia know details about deceased family members she never met? How could he describe so accurately a place she had never heard of before? How, after the experience, did she seem to carry wisdom beyond her years? The transformation happened little by little, but it was impossible to ignore the signs. The mother began to pray more, seeking the presence of God more. Not because she was scared, but because she felt like she had been given a gift. Sophia was the answer to many doubts that she carried in her heart. But it wasn't just his family that changed. As the days went by, Sophia's story began to spread. Close friends heard the story, neighbors found out, and soon people arrived that the family didn't even know, wanting to hear with their own ears what that child had to say. Some came curious, others skeptical, but everyone left with something different in their hearts. The most impressive thing was that Sophia never tried to convince anyone. She simply said what she knew, what she had seen, what she had felt, and anyone who heard her knew that those words were not invented. There was something about them, something deep, something that touched the soul. Over time, some people began to compare Sophia's account with other near-death experiences already recorded in the world, and what they discovered was even more impressive. There were patterns. Many NDEers have described a tunnel of light. They described an inexplicable peace. They reported seeing deceased relatives who welcomed them on the other side. Some said they heard messages that they needed to bring back, warnings, guidance, words of love and comfort. And then came the inevitable question. How could these stories, coming from different parts of the world, from people of different ages, cultures and religions, be so similar? How can we explain that a child of just 3 years old came up with a description that fit exactly what so many other people had already reported? There was no ignoring the signs. Sophia continued her life like any other child. He played, ran, laughed, but now with a different shine. It always seemed to be connected to something bigger. Sometimes he stopped and looked into space, as if he were hearing something that no one else could hear. One of these times, her mother asked her what she was doing. "I hear the wind speak of God." The mother didn't know what to answer. He just felt a shiver and a mix of emotion and admiration. It wasn't just her family that was changing. As time passed, many people who heard the story began to rethink their own lives. Some who had strayed from God began to feel the desire to return. Others, who previously believed in nothing beyond the material world, began to question themselves. What if God really was closer than we imagine? What if what comes after this life is so wonderful that our limited minds cannot comprehend it? What if we're getting signals all the time, but we're just not paying attention? Sophia's story was not just an isolated event. It was a calling, proof that there is something beyond what the eyes can see. And what happened next? The new revelations that emerged, the other signs that began to appear, are even more surprising. Have you ever heard or experienced something that made it clear without a doubt that God was there, guiding you and showing you that there is something greater? Comment. I believe God speaks to us. Your testimony may be the answer someone needs to read today to strengthen their faith and remember that we are never alone. Ever since I heard this story, I can't stop thinking about the impact it has had, not just on the lives of those who witnessed it up close, but on all of us who seek to understand what lies beyond what our eyes can see. Sophia's account was not just an isolated experience. It was a calling, a revelation that makes us question everything we thought we knew about life, death, and what comes after. How many times do we find ourselves living on automatic, worried about everyday problems, without really reflecting on the meaning of it all? We work, we fight, we suffer, we love. But deep down, do we know where we are going? Is there a greater purpose for all of this? Sophia's experience forces us to face these questions head-on. Because she wasn't the only one to go through this. Throughout history, countless reports of near-death experiences have emerged, all with incredibly similar details. People who, for a brief moment, left this world and returned with a message. The light, the feeling of indescribable peace, the presence of a celestial being, the vision of deceased family members. These are patterns that are repeated so many times that it is difficult to believe that they are just hallucinations of the brain. So what does science say about this? Some scientists try to explain near-death experiences as chemical reactions in the brain, the body's last-ditch effort to survive. They say that a lack of oxygen can cause hallucinations, that extreme fear can make the mind create comfort scenarios to alleviate the trauma. But is it really? How then can we explain the fact that so many people report the same things, even though they have never met? How do we explain the details that some of them brought back, like Sophia describing deceased relatives she had never met? How can we explain the profound transformation that takes place in these people's lives after these experiences? The truth is that there are things that go far beyond our understanding. And perhaps humanity's biggest mistake is trying to fit everything within the limits of science, when science itself doesn't yet have all the answers. What this experience teaches us, above all, is that life does not end here. What Sophia saw was not just a dream or an illusion. It was a glimpse of what awaits us. It was proof that there is a Creator who knows us, who loves us, and who has a plan for each of us. And if that is true, and in my heart of hearts I believe it is, then what are we doing with our lives? How many times do we miss clear signs that God is trying to speak to us? How many times do we ignore that feeling in our chest, that inner voice that warns us when we are on the wrong path? How many times do we stop being grateful for another day, for another chance to make a difference in someone's life? If there's one thing Sophia's story teaches us, it's that every second counts, because one day we will all cross that border. And when that moment comes, what will we have to present? Are we living in a way that brings us closer to God? Or are we wasting the opportunity to know the truth while we are still here? Perhaps the biggest lesson we can take from all of this is the importance of seeking a deeper connection with the spiritual, to look at life with different eyes, to value the little things more, to see the purpose in everything that happens to us. Because if there is a purpose, if there is an ultimate destination, then we are here for a reason. Nothing is by chance. Not the pain, not the difficulties, not the moments of joy. It's all part of something bigger, something we will one day fully understand. But until then, it's up to us to decide how we're going to live, whether we will continue to ignore the signs or whether we will open our eyes to what God is trying to show us. Getting here is not by chance. Something in this story spoke to you, touched your heart, and it may have been a sign, a call, the very voice of God manifesting itself at this moment. Did this message bring something important to your life? So be part of this journey. Connect even more with this truth and allow this transformation to continue. Access to knowledge transforms lives. Stories like this reveal truths that often go unnoticed, strengthen faith, and connect us with something much greater. Subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell to follow content that brings answers, inspiring testimonies and the mysteries of life after death in the light of faith. Your experience can transform lives. This story brought deep reflection and could be the answer someone is looking for right now. Write in the comments, "I heard the voice of God." Your testimony can strengthen the faith of someone who needs this message today. Every action generates impact. This testimony can reach and transform lives, bringing hope to those who need it most. Leave your like so that this message reaches even further. And don't stop here. Something even more surprising is coming. The next video is now on your screen, and what you see may challenge everything you believe. Click now and continue this journey. See you there.